Are you looking for a way to make learning your students' names faster and easier? I learned all of my students' names, and I have hundreds, within the first 2 classes, and my secret weapon is the name game. Let me show you how to play it. My name is Megan. I've been an EFL teacher for 10 years, and I'm going to show you today how to play the name game. First, let me tell you how to play. Second, I'll tell you why it works for learning students' names. And third, I'll give you some tips on how to make it go smoothly, because it's a really simple game, but it can go very wrong. First, let me tell you how to play. It's super easy. Every student will stand up and say their name and sit down, but they have to remember the names of all the students who came before them. So for example, if I'm the first person, I would stand up and say, my name is Megan, sit down. The next person would stand up and say, her name is Megan, my name is Mary, and sit down. The third person would stand up and say, her name is Megan, her name is Mary, my name is John, and sit down. And you continue until the entire class has stood and said their names. Like I said, really simple. Let me tell you, number 2, why this works for learning students' names. The reason this is such a secret weapon for learning their names is because while everyone is standing and saying their names and saying everyone else's names, I am fully plugged in, fully focused, just staring at faces and memorizing names. So as each student stands up and goes through the list of names, I get to mentally remember everyone's name and match it to the face again and again and again and again. And I am just staring at Megan, I'm staring at Mary, I'm staring at John, trying to commit their names to memory and match it with the faces. By the end of everyone standing up, I am very easily able to go through the entire list of names. That doesn't mean I will remember perfectly, but it means that I'll remember, 80-90% of the names just after playing this activity. Now, let me give you some tips for how to make this go smoothly. I know this sounds so simple, but I have been doing this game for over 10 years, and let me tell you, when it's good, it's excellent, and when it goes wrong, it goes very wrong. So let me give you some tips for how to introduce the game to the students and what to do to make sure it goes perfectly. The first tip is to give an example like the one I just gave. So I will tell the students that the first person stands up and says, my name is Megan, sits down. The second person stands up and says, her name is Megan, my name is Mary, sits down. The third person stands up and says, her name is Megan, her name is Mary, my name is John, sits down. I go through that example with them. I generally only do 3. I find if I only do 2, students get a little bit confused. They think they just have to say the person who is sitting next to them, not the entire list of everyone who stood before. And if I say 4 or 5 names, it usually gets lost in the kerfuffle of students figuring out what the game is actually going to be. So give the students an example of exactly what you want from them. Pro tip, when you come into the classroom before you even start the class, it can be really helpful to learn a couple people's names, and then you can actually use the actual names of the students in the classroom as part of your example. The second tip I have is to allow students to write down the names and use paper as we go through the game. This is not a memory game for them, and to be honest, it's much harder for them anyway because they're trying to remember words in another language, not their native language. So I usually ask the students, how good is your memory? And they all say, oh, it's so bad. And so I tell them that they're allowed to use paper. I tell them to get out a piece of paper right now, and it's okay to jot down the names of everyone else. I didn't used to do this, and my goodness, this took forever. Everyone was really slow. They were really stressed about remembering. Adding in the chance to use paper just made it flow so much easier. So give them an example, tell them to grab paper, give them a second to grab their paper before you continue, and then go to step number 3 and explain to them the order that we are going to go in. So don't just say, we're gonna start at the back and move to the front. actually walk through the classroom and show them exactly how it's going to go. What does it mean to start in the back? Are we starting in the left or are we starting at the right? Once we finish that row, are we going to go back to the opposite side of the room and start again, or are we going to snake our way through? I've just found it works so much easier. It wastes less time if you just walk to where the starting point is and actually point to the people who are going to be going next in line. It's something that's really small, but it just makes it go smoother. For tip number 4, this might be my biggest tip actually, is that the order really matters. Don't start at the front of the class, start at the back of the class. We all know the kind of students who sit at the back of the class. I don't think I need to explain that. Those are usually the students who are not as motivated. Usually they're a little bit quieter. Usually they just don't have as high level of English compared to the students in the front. If you start at the front of the classroom, you are giving the most eager, possibly the hardest working students the easiest tasks, and leaving a quite difficult, possibly the task that requires the most pressure, for the students at the back. The students who end are going to have to remember everyone in the classroom. So instead of letting the students at the back have that pressure, give it to the students at the front. The students at the back have the easiest task. They just have to stand up, say their name, sit down. Usually they can manage remembering a handful of names, and it's the students at the front who are really eager and really focused and really hardworking who are a little bit more diligent in remembering everyone's names. Now, we're stereotyping here, but honestly, that's usually what happens. Usually the students who are really eager are sitting at the front. So if you are starting at the front and going all the way to the back, then everything is just going to slowly dissolve into chaos and disorder by the time you get to the end. It also slows everything down because the students who haven't been very diligent in paying attention are struggling to get through the list of names. So just save yourself the trouble and start at the back and move to the front. Number 5, also talking about the order. I have found that for some reason, it works better if you are going horizontally throughout the room, like you are going from left to right and left to right and left to right, rather than just doing one side of the classroom and another side of the classroom. I am a big experimenter and I knew I was going to film this video. So during the first week of the semester, when I was playing the name game, 10 times, I tried something different with all of these just to test my theories. For one of the classes, I started at the front instead of starting at the back. And I had one class that we did one side versus another side, and it just doesn't work as well for some reason. People are not as attentive when it's the other side of the room. I don't really have to worry about that, compared to when we are moving this way from the back slowly to the front the whole time. Tip number 6, just tell them that they can help each other. I tell my students before we begin that this is not an exam. This is not something to be nervous about. So if you forget someone's name, it's okay. Let's all help each other. And I found that not only does this reduce the nerves and the pressure in the classroom, but it also helps students feel a little bit more engaged throughout, because they know that they might have to repeat their name again for a classmate who had forgotten. And it just saves a lot of time. It makes the game go much smoother, because instead of having one student go, oh, I forget, people are really quick to jump in and help him. Tip number 7 is to remind the students to speak really loudly when they are saying their names, because you're going to have students who just aren't thinking about that, or students who are a little bit quieter, maybe they're a little bit shy. And if we can't hear people's names clearly, then the game just very quickly dissolves into a mess. Why are we doing this? What is going on? So before you begin, just remind the students to say it loudly. If students start to get quieter, remind them, hey, everybody has to be able to hear your name. They want to remember your name. So can you say it a little bit louder? Tip number 8 is to help the students out by repeating the names as well. So when John in the back says, my name is John, when I'm standing at the front, I will repeat the name just to make sure everyone heard it very loudly. And it also helps things just stay on track a little bit more. Students know that once I've said, okay, John, then the next person should stand up. It just makes it a little bit more of a routine, and it makes sure that everyone can hear the names clearly. It also makes sure that I'm pronouncing their names clearly, because sometimes students have creative names. For number 9, I would say to choose your words very carefully. This is such a simple game, but there's so many moving parts to it. So in the example, if I say, her name is Megan, her name is Mary, my name is John, 90% of the time, students will copy exactly what I do. So when they stand up, they will say, her name is blah, 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 her name is blah, 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 his name is blah, 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 my name is blah, blah, blah. But during the example, if I say, Megan, Mary, my name is John, they tend to copy that as well. And there are some pros and cons for both of these. And you know, when I was experimenting, I tried both of them, and it's gonna be up to you which one you prefer. Okay, what are the pros and cons then? So if you have them say the full sentence, my name is, her name is, his name is, one, you get a little bit of a better idea of their English level because you get to hear them make really simple grammar mistakes. I had one class where almost every student was making a grammar mistake. They were saying things like, his name is Mary, instead of saying her name is Mary. Or they would say, she name is Mary. And for that class, very quickly, within the first 5 minutes of class, I knew that their level was generally going to be a little bit lower than some of the other classes who didn't slip up and make those simple mistakes. This also slows down the game as well, because you're hearing, her name is Megan, her name is Mary, my name is John, which gives you a little bit more time to be like staring at the students and trying to memorize their faces. I found when I did the classes that just kind of powered through them, it was a tiny bit more difficult for me to remember everyone's names. I had to focus a little bit more just because we were going so quickly. It was Megan, Mary, John, instead of her name is Mary, her name is Megan, his name is John. It just slows things down a little bit, and that's the con of it. Having that slows the game down a lot, which can also bring the vibe a little bit down as well. At the beginning of the game, students are always really interested. By the end, it's gotten a little bit tedious and it's gotten a little bit monotonous. But we'll talk about this later. This game is not really for the students. This is for you as a teacher. This is my chance. This is my one chance during the semester to be a little bit selfish and do something that's really going to help me in the long run. And my last tip number 10, is that you should be the very last person. I usually don't tell the students this. I usually surprise them and I say, okay, I'm actually gonna try to get everybody in the classroom. I really like to do this because it brings a moment of finality to the game, but also students are quite interested. Their attention span might have started to dwindle a little bit, but when they hear that I'm going to try to do everybody, and I don't take notes throughout the game either. So a lot of them are very curious to see if I can make it through everybody's name without actually using a paper. Usually my classrooms have around 30 or 40 students in them, which sounds crazy. It sounds like a lot of names to memorize, but really when you're hearing the names again and again and again, I don't find it that difficult to remember all of their names, which I mean, I'll take that as a blessing. But you don't have to do this one if you're ever unsure. I've done it before where I've felt a little bit sick, like I had a cold at the beginning of the semester and my brain was just not functioning well. And when that happens and when I'm not confident that I can do most of the students or all of the students, then I just don't do it. Then I just have the student be the last one. The last thing I want to talk about before we end is, why do I continue doing this? Because there was a time that for a couple of semesters I stopped doing the name game because I just was tired of it. I found it a little bit tedious and I was worried that the students found it tedious as well. But very quickly I went back to it, and I think it's something that's just going to be in my repertoire for a very, very long time because of all the benefits I get from it. The first reason is that from the very first day, students are required to stand up and say something in English. A lot of stereotypical classrooms in China don't require students to speak the language out loud. A lot of it is very teacher focused, and students will just listen carefully to the teacher and they don't have as many chances to speak out loud. So I like setting this precedent. It breaks the ice in a way that students have already stood up and spoken English in front of the entire class, and it sets a precedent for what I expect my students to do, because in my class I want them speaking all the time from the very beginning of class. And so on the very first day, I want them standing up, getting over a little bit of shyness if they feel shy, and speaking out in English. The second reason that I always play this game is because I get an understanding of their English level. Like I said, I can tell if students are really struggling when they say, she name is Mary. I get an understanding of their ability in pronunciation and listening carefully to my instructions. And so I really like being exposed to their general English level right from the start. Along with that, number 3, I really like getting introduced to the class's personality and individual personalities as well. Sometimes the class will be very vocal, very active, very helpful, very supportive. You know, if a student forgets, they're all chiming in. They're like, Judy, her name is Judy, and they're all helping each other, and they're very active, they're very quick to jump in. Other times they're very quiet and they don't jump in and help as much. You know, some classes are not very diligent with writing down the names. Other classes are like super focused and they're really careful with all of the names. And just watching them during this game gives me a general idea of the class's personality as a whole. It also gives me an idea of individual personality. During this last semester, there was one student who turned beet red when he said his name. And he was at the very back of the classroom too. So he only had to say like 2 or 3 names. But when he said his name, he turned beet red. And so very quickly I knew like, okay, this is a student who's not as comfortable, you know, standing up in front of a class and speaking out English. So if students are really shy and really quiet, then it gives me an idea of how to interact with them moving forward. And if they're really outgoing and really talkative, it gives me an idea as well. So I just love that I get to collect so much information. Of course, I'm learning their names, but I'm also trying to understand the class as well. The fourth reason why I like this game is because it lets the students know that I know their names. So when I tell them that I'm taking notes on their participation, and I will know if they are late to class, and I will write down if they didn't do their homework, they know that I know their names. And the last reason that I do this is just the most obvious. It's so I know their names. During those semesters when I did not do this, when I didn't play the name game, I found it 10 times more difficult to remember everyone's names. Now I might not remember everyone's names perfectly the next time we come to class, but generally I have all of their names, and the few names that I forgot, I can just really quickly review or have the students remind me, or use a couple of other techniques to remember their names. And just that's the number one reason why I continue to do this, is it helps me so much to be able to learn their names so quickly. If you have any questions about how to play, you can definitely leave comments down below. Leave ideas for how you learn students' names, because I did not expect that to be such a difficult part of becoming a teacher. It just takes so much brain power at the beginning of the semester when there's so much else going on. So if you have any suggestions or questions, you can definitely leave them down below. You can always check out the blog post that's written about this activity, but give it a try in your own classrooms. Maybe it will be a really good fit and help you as you try to learn your students' names. Okay, that's all for today. I'll see you next time. Bye.